Good afternoon, everybody. Hello, my name is Lee Middleton. I'm the Chief Executive of the National Youth Agency, and it's my pleasure to be with you today. It's been an interesting week in terms of youth sector guidance. Thank you for joining us. I hope you find today useful. I'm going to give you a bit of a presentation, talk you through a few things. We're not going to go through all the guidance in all its detail. The document is there. It's there for you to have a look at and go through. But what we are picking up are some common themes and issues which we will try and address either through the presentation now or through the Q&A as we go. So we will do our best on that for you. Some of you may not know who the National Youth Agency are, never really heard of us until COVID, so I thought I'd just explain. The National Youth Agency is a little unique in the youth sector in that we are the professional statutory regulatory body for youth work and sort of youth services across England. And that means that in normal times we set qualification standards, we work with Ofsted on Ofsted standards and things like that, and we support grassroots youth services and youth organisations, typically through local councils in old money in old times, but more and more so through the voluntary sector. We've launched a whole training arm, we've delivered national programmes for young people, and we try and complement what the rest of the sector does as well. So we are set up by Parliament in 1964 to do that regulatory role, and that's what we're here. So when COVID came around and the government said we need guidance, we need someone to support around the guidance, they came to us because we are the regulatory body for the youth sector. So whether you're in the Scouts, the Guides, or a village youth club, the NYA is sort of trying its best to look out for everybody as we go. This webinar's been a huge success. We had 500 tickets and they all sold. I think the waiting list is 200 long. We will probably run another one of these to try and capture those colleagues who couldn't make today. We will also be we're recording this as I speak, so you'll be able to watch this back later on if that is useful. So just want to sort of talk you through the guidance process really, and it's an interesting journey to achieve. So before us on the screen, you shall see we have the latest guidance document, and it's really important that you keep up to date with guidance versions. So we're currently on version 8, which was released on the 8th of August. That guidance hasn't changed. The current document is still fully live, current and accurate. Please go and use it and download it. I've put the link on the web at the top there of the web page where you can download the document. In developing our guidance, we worked with the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, and I'm really pleased that on the call today we actually have the civil servant who's worked so closely with us, and the achievement yesterday of keeping youth services open is partly down to us, but mostly down to that civil servant. It's not protocol to call out their names and say who they are, but she'll know who she is, and we're hugely grateful, and everybody at home should give her a clap because she's been amazing. In developing our guidance, we've worked with a whole raft of public bodies to achieve things. The first versions, we had to work through a body of experts with Public Health England, Health and Safety Executive. We drafted all the guidance, and then it goes through a process which is quite unbelievable, where it goes through the Home Office, Department for Education, the Ministry for Local Government, the Cabinet Office, as well as the DCMS and a range of other government departments, and they all comment on it. And we get to a place where the world is comfortable, we're comfortable, and it's workable for you guys out there on the ground. So our guidance has been through a very rigorous process before it's published. Even the updates go through a process. So our guidance is fully endorsed and supported by Public Health England, the Health and Safety Executive and the DCMS. And when there are changes needed, we work with those colleagues to adjust this. We've worked through a ministerial task force. So Diana Barron, who's the Minister for Civil Society, chairs a group that comes together with key stakeholders, and we discuss changes and needs and things that are coming and going. Preparing for winter is the current kind of hot topic for us, and local lockdowns, and we work through those stakeholders. So you've got all the big key youth sector organisations represented, and we work with those partners to develop this guidance. Just a quick word around national association. So the NYA, on behalf of the youth sector, publishes its advice, its document and its guidance. And that guidance is fully compliant with the regulations. And when I say regulations, I mean the law, because the law changes quite regularly with COVID-19 restrictions, and our guidance is compliant with that. But we've encouraged local national associations, and you've got a few of them on the screen here. This is by no means all of them by any stretch, to develop their own approaches for their own groups, their own organisations, because they will know what what will work for their groups in the ground, in their types of premises, those sorts of things. So our guidance is sort of an umbrella piece to go across the top. We encouraged national partners to interpret that and flow that down. So I know there were some questions coming through. Say like the local lockdown area in the northwest, where nationally the whole nation is amber according to the National Youth Agency, but certain organisations have defined that actually they've kept those areas at red. That is a decision by that association, and it's their judgment around risk and how they can manage things and support their volunteers and young people. And I know all of us, everybody in the whole youth sector, is absolutely passionate about reopening as much as possible, as fast as possible, but as safe as it has to be. And safety is the absolute critical piece. If it's not safe, then we won't allow it. And there are some nuances and some quirks of guidance, which I will talk you through. Just to say, we've got the chat feature open. You're welcome to post any questions. My colleague Alex is in the background looking at those. And when we get to the Q&A section, he will feed those questions through to us. We will do our best to answer those questions. You also submitted questions in advance, and I have a very, very long spreadsheet of which I will also try and work through key themes. So that's the National Association. So please follow your National Association's guidelines. It might be really frustrating that they won't let you do what you want to be doing, but I promise you they've really thought about it hard. They've engaged with us and dug through the evidence and the need, and they are doing their absolute best. And we applaud them for working so collaboratively. Just a quick point that the guidance that put out by the National Youth Agency is England only. Our jurisdiction as an organisation in terms of regulations is England. We do work closely with the other home nations, but in terms of the document that we talk about, it is only applicable to England. I wanted to sort of talk about how guidance nationally works, because I think this might help colleagues understand some of the challenges. So guidance is sort of in three levels, sorry. There's levels 1, 2 and 3. So level 1 is what we would call national infrastructure. And that kind of comes first, and it trumps everything else in many respects. So that would be your schools, hospitals, roads, prisons, police services, that absolute top level national infrastructure that is needed to run the nation, keep people safe, healthy, etc. And they will always the government will always put that element of guidance and the system first. So there's often a lot of comments around, well, why can they do X, Y, and Z in schools, but I can't do that here? And in my youth centre or my scout hut or wherever I'm operating. And the reason is because there are different levels of guidance preferences. The second level is the traded economy. So you'll have seen the Prime Minister talking about getting back to work, shops open, cafes, starting to put some more restrictions back on that. But the traded economy is a massive part of keeping the country going, keeping people employed, making sure we don't have horrific levels of poverty, which we probably got anyway, but trying to avoid that getting any worse. And then there's everything else, and that's where the youth sector kind of sits in. And when we sit alongside leisure centres and local gyms and theatres and museums, a whole range of other areas of guidance, but the government operates in 3 different tiers. So you will see specific government guidance that comes out that might be applicable to schools that isn't applicable. You can't transfer it across to the youth sector. So the classic question is always, well, how can I have some of my young people are in a secondary school and they're in a bubble of 200 in their year group, but when they come to my youth club in an evening, I've got to put them in a bubble of 15. How does that work? That doesn't seem to make any sense. And the reason is the government will make a judgment about trying to protect mainstream education. And if to do that, they have to put restrictions on other aspects of society, well, then so be it, because that means we can keep schools open. And ultimately, education is the greatest empower of young people. So there are differences between different parts of the system. So you will see some of those. And they are deliberate in some respects. They are built and guided to support us to do what we need to be doing, and as much as we're allowed to do, but actually to protect those kind of core national infrastructure elements. There's less of a link with the traded economy, being perfectly honest. It's very much around that national infrastructure, schools and education, and then probably us in the youth sector on the next tier down. So just wanted to sort of explain that that's how the process works. So when we created guidance, it goes in through the system, through the Cabinet Office, it has to be approved, it's sort of mapped across other decisions that they're making at policy level to try and keep everybody safe. Now, it's very clear, obviously, that there are lots of things happening quite quickly. Things are changing, and the government has to react at speed, particularly if the infection rate, the R number, as everyone calls it, goes up. And we've seen that this week when the new restrictions of groups of 6, etc. And we don't get notification of those, but then nor does the government department that we work with, nor does the DCMS. We all learn it, not quite in the news, but we learn it very last minute, and then we have to react and keep up. So where we saw this week, the public announcement by the health minister saying that actually we're going to change group sizing. We learned that at the same time as everybody else. We then have to work with our brilliant civil servants at the DCMS through to the Cabinet Office. We have to put our business cases forward, and then we secure our agreement. And this week we did well. We secured agreement to keep going unchanged, and that is fantastic. So there's the other questions I've seen quite a bit is, well, there's the youth sector guidance, but then there's other guidance that could be applied to youth sector type activity. So, if you're playing sports, you could be in maybe groups of 30. If you were in, theatres, you can sing, you can't do that in a youth centre. There are different, and actually it'd be more convenient in some respects to follow the sports guidance or the leisure centre guidance. And our message is really clear, I think, which is that should not be done. The youth sector guidance has been crafted specifically for our sector. And our sector is diverse and it's challenging, and it operates in the streets in the dark at night, in the rain, it operates in tents, it operates in youth centres, big old leisure centres, school sites, all sorts of environments. And actually the leisure centre guidance, which is the best one I've been keeping up with, is geared up for properly, professionally run leisure centres with full-time cleaning crews, coaches and staff and what have you. And there are big differences. And from a litigation perspective, if you are not following the youth guidance, but you are a youth centre or a youth sector organisation or project, you would struggle, I think, to say, well, we were following bubbles of 30 because that's what the football guidance says. And the football guidance is geared towards a football group in a field, kicking footballs around, or being in a large sports hall and just coming in to do that one activity. Whereas we know when we're doing youth sector activity, we have young people coming and going, they're milling around, they're doing different things, they're socialising, because it's a social thing, not a sport activity. So our message is really clear. You should all be following the youth sector guidance, and that is prime for our sector. The only thing I would say to add to that level is if your national association has a sort of a layer that goes over the top of the youth sector guidance, you should follow that too. So we create a video around our guidance, and rather than walk through every bit, I'm going to take the next 6 minutes, show you that video. And if you've seen it before and you've seen it several times over, go and grab another cup of tea and come back in 6 minutes time. But this video is really relevant. It's still current. The rules haven't changed. And it's just a useful way of quickly running through all the guidance.
Youth sector activities provide somewhere to go, something to do, and someone to talk to. They're an essential service for young people, and especially vulnerable young people. But in light of COVID-19, we must follow guidance to ensure the safety of young people, youth leaders and volunteers. The National Youth Agency is the professional, statutory and regulatory body for youth work. We've developed the guidance in this video to help you manage youth sector activities while COVID-19 is present in England. It should be used as a guide to inform local decision-making. If your group is affiliated with a national association, please check with them regarding additional safeguards and requirements. The NYA sets a readiness level in line with government requirements. There are 4 levels, which determine the types and amounts of youth sector activity permitted. The readiness level is published on the NYA website. You should monitor it weekly. As the readiness level decreases, then more youth sector activity will be recommended. If it increases, then youth sector activity needs to reduce in line with the framework. Before changing your activities in line with the readiness level, you must review, amend and update your action plan and risk assessments. The readiness framework applies only to England. If the readiness level is red, online and digital youth services are permitted. Detached local youth activities and one-to-one sessions with high-need young people are permitted, but outdoors only. If the readiness level is amber, online and digital youth services are permitted. Detached local youth activities are permitted where they're consistent with social distancing guidelines. One-to-one sessions with young people are permitted indoors. Small group sessions that are consistent with social distancing guidelines are also permitted indoors. If the readiness level is yellow, indoor group work sessions are permitted. This includes multiple one-to-one sessions or multiple group work sessions. Outdoor learning trips and visits are also permitted. All activities must be consistent with social distancing guidelines. If the readiness level is green, all services can open as per normal yearly operations. Overnight trips and visits are permitted. International travel is also permitted within Foreign and Commonwealth Office guidance. All providers of youth sector activities must complete a COVID-19 action plan, which will include a risk assessment and consider wider policies including safeguarding. Your risk assessment should consider the risks posed by COVID-19 at your location, whether that's a faith or community centre, a youth centre or an outdoor space. Social distancing must be maintained at all times, including when arriving and departing or travelling between locations. Where it isn't possible, consider whether that activity needs to continue in order for you to operate. Consider other actions to mitigate the risks, such as keeping activity time as short as possible, using screens or barriers to separate people from each other. Use back-to-back or side-to-side working instead of face-to-face. Use fixed teams or partnering to reduce the numbers of people each person has contact with. Put up posters to remind everyone of the need for social distancing at all times. Ensure any site used for youth activities is clean prior to restarting. Consider frequent cleaning of work areas and equipment, especially objects that are regularly touched, such as kitchens, sports and ICT equipment. Provide hand-washing facilities or hand sanitizer at entry and exit points. And put up signs and posters to encourage regular hand-washing using the correct technique. Additional PPE beyond what you usually wear is not considered beneficial, although using a face covering could help to protect others. Ensure you're aware of young people and trusted adults who have an increased risk from COVID-19. You may need to take steps to ensure equality of access provision for young people who are shielding or at increased risk. Clinically vulnerable young people should be offered the safest activities that enable them to maintain the correct social distance from others. Clinically vulnerable workers should be deployed to alternative duties. Attention should also be paid to those who live with extremely vulnerable individuals. It is essential that all staff, young people and visitors are given training to understand the COVID-19 safety procedures that have been put in place. In summary, to manage youth sector activities while COVID-19 is present in England, you need to 1. Read the guidance. 2. Talk to your staff, young people and
Oh, we don't need to play it again. Sorry, that moved on too quick. Just the summary there at the end of the key pieces you need to do. I just wanted to pick up with colleagues the readiness framework. We've created this working with sector partners. The videos sort of talked you through it, but we will change this as and when we're allowed to do so. So there's a common theme that we often hear around doing trips and overnight residentials and a desire to do those. And they will come at when we move into yellow, which will be later on. I'm often asked, when do I think we'll be moving to yellow? And being honest, moving into winter, seeing the lockdowns changes that we've been seeing this week, it's going to be quite some time. I'm clearly going to be into next year before we're able to do those types of activities. And we're really aware that's very frustrating and that it's a brilliant opportunity for young people. Trips and visits overnight, trips and visits are permitted, but overnight stops are very much pegged to what the education sector does. So when schools can do residentials, well then we will certainly allow the youth sector to do it. And at the moment, schools aren't allowed to do overnight stays either. The readiness system goes up and down as things change. The whole of England at the moment is amber as far as the NYA is concerned. Even in the lockdown areas of the northwest or other areas, we were able to keep the youth sector open and operating in bubbles of 15, and I will talk about bubbles in a second. The rule of thumb that we were working with is if pubs and restaurants could operate and parents could go down the pub, then young people should be able to go to a well-structured and organised youth sector activity. That is certainly why we're allowed to continue. It's really important that we put all the right measures in place, that we take all the right precautions, but as long as we do that, we will be allowed to continue. We will move to yellow in time, but it will be a while, and I think just be ready and prepared for that. That's going to take a little bit of time. You can check what the current readiness level is by going to the NYA's website, and as soon as you go to our website, you can Google us and find us. You'll get a pop-up box that will tell you immediately what the current readiness level is, and if there are any changes, such as we put a change on there yesterday, then it will reflect on this pop-up. This pop-up, if you can actually look behind the pop-up on the screen, there's a sort of orange bar. There's an exact copy of that there. So if you click away from it, you can read it on the front page of our website. If things change, we will change this. If we relax things, we will relax it every Monday. So we encourage everybody to check our website every Monday afternoon. And for Monday afternoons, if we were able to move to yellow, for example, we would make that change there. If the legislation changes and we're required to move everything to red, then we would change it immediately to red, and we would use the usual channels to communicate that. The website has all the guidance documents, links to all the videos, and ways to access all the information. So please go to our website. It is a really useful thing. So what changed this week? Suddenly the government's announced that we can't be in more than groups of 6, and did that mean that the youth sector has to operate in bubbles of 6, or can we not operate at all? And the reality is, absolutely nothing has changed for us from last week. The exemption that we were able to secure this week means that actually we carry on as normal. So whatever you did last week, you can do this week, and whatever you were planning to do next week, as long as it was within the guidelines and the rules, then you are very welcome to continue operating as normal. You do not need to make any additional measures. You don't need to do anything additional to what's in our guidance document. There's no new guidance on top of anything. We've just been given permission to kind of politely ignore the ruling of 6 and stick with bubbles of 15 as long as we're safe, and that's what we're able to do. So crack on, carry on. Please go and work with young people, do what you can do, support them, engage with them. They need us more than ever, and we've got the agreement to allow us to do that. And I think the agreement that came yesterday will set a number of precedents, hopefully going forward. So if there are other restrictions, we know the youth sector is valued and will need and needs to be there to support young people. Nobody wishes to see further complete national lockdowns and closures of the youth sector, and we're working hard to make sure that's not the case. It is a really complicated landscape, but we're doing our best. And one of the other things that we achieved relatively recently is if we had to move an area back to red, you will still be able to support meet with young people in 1-to-1 or maybe small groups of up to 2 or 3 at the most. But if that becomes an issue, we will put out guidance. But we never want to see a complete shutdown of the youth sector again, as we did at the beginning of COVID. And there is no blueprint for COVID-19. There's no obvious blueprint for a pandemic. We just have to do the best we can and move forward. So yesterday the government pulled out its new strap lines of wash your hands, cover your face, and make space. So hands, face, and space. This should be the mantra that we talk to all young people about. This is what we should be focused on and moving forward. I just thought it was useful to highlight that to everybody. So we're not going to go through the guidance in line by line, but you do need to be COVID secure. You need to make sure your venue is COVID secure. And to do that, you need the following things in place. So you need to develop an action plan, and that has to be clear about who's got the roles and responsibilities to operate and manage your activities, your settings. You need to have a risk assessment in place, and that needs to be up to date. There is no point writing a risk assessment in June and still applying it in September if things are changing. So you need to be revisiting that risk assessment regularly, and when by regularly, at least a weekly, to run through it, have a quick scan, go, is it still accurate? Yes, fine, we don't need to change it. Or actually things are going on or things have happened and we need to adapt this. But you need to be keeping that risk assessment right up to date. You need to be working in manageable groups and bubbles, and those bubbles need to be age appropriate. So bubbles are bubbles of 15, and we're going to talk about bubbles in a minute, so I won't go through it here. You need robust hygiene, clear hand washing. People should wash their hands when they arrive. Hand sanitizer is useful, but not a doesn't substitute hand washing. Are we cleaning the venue? Are we wiping down surfaces? Are handles being cleaned down? Are we using if we're using pool tables or traditional things, sports equipment, are we cleaning it? If we're in the kitchen, are we cleaning surfaces, utensils? And that has to be really, really rigorous and quite repetitive, and might get quite boring, but it's very important to keep that hygiene up. Is your venue clean? If you've got the right arrangements in place to have it cleaned, are your team capable of cleaning it, and making sure that's all in place. Face coverings are worn where needed, and I'm going to cover face coverings because that's a huge issue for the sector at the moment, and we're going to go through that in a bit more detail. Have you considered the health and well-being of young people and critically staff? Much of what we see at the NYA at the moment is brilliant, passionate adults desperate to open up and do stuff for young people, but not necessarily considering the impact on themselves or their volunteers or their workforce. And please take that very seriously. Young people, as all the data seems to be showing, have less severity if they catch COVID-19 compared to older adults. And the older you get, the more overweight you may be, the more at risk you could be. And so please be very, very cautious about that, and make sure you're aware before you just fling the doors open and let them in. I know nobody's trying to do that. I know you're all thinking this through, but it's an area that we've had to do a lot of work with supporting. Is your safeguarding robust? Now, this actually isn't a COVID secure requirement, but this is a requirement of every youth sector organisation and project, day in, day out, no matter what you're doing, COVID or not. And we've seen some examples where we've allowed some safeguarding measures to slip a bit because we're a bit busy doing other things. You can't allow that to happen. Your top priority is the safety of young people, and safeguarding them is a major part of that work. I'm sorry if I'm teaching to the converted, but it's something that we have picked up. Social distancing is in place, and that is challenging. We have to be 1 metre or more apart from each other. We should be doing activities that mean we don't have to get within 1 metre of each other. That can be quite challenging in a youth centre, in a youth space, or a community village hall, wherever we're operating from. But we need to be making sure we are socially distancing. And then the NHS test and trace information is gathered together. Yesterday they announced that they're changing that to make that lawful. You must legally capture that information. We've not made a big thing of this in the youth sector. Almost everybody in the youth sector, it seems, has registers and captures who's coming and going. Funders need it. It's useful to know who's your member. And so I think that's already well in place, but you need to have that information, and it's got to be robust. Just to say, if you're out and about on the streets doing detached youth work, that's not a requirement because they're not in your venue, and it is for when they're in your venue. So detached youth workers, don't stress that you have to start asking all these young people who've never met you before their personal details. That's not required. So I want to talk about bubbles briefly. So bubbles work in a number of ways, but primarily groups of 15. And we need to take our young people and put them in a bubble of 15 for that day's session. So they don't have to be kept in that bubble every Monday night forever. But so next Monday they could be in a different bubble of 15. Ideally, you keep them in the same bubble. I think that would be smart. Try and keep them in year groups, but not always possible. But a bubble of 15 young people plus staff. So you might have 2 or 3 staff working with your bubble of 15, have 18 in total. That is absolutely fine. If venues are COVID secure and you have enough space, and this is really key, if you've got more than one big room or more than one space where you could have groups of 15, and you can operate with more than one bubble. Obviously bubbles need staff, so you're going to need enough leaders and workers and volunteers to support that, but you can operate in 30, 45, even 60 plus if your venue is large enough. And if your venue isn't big enough, then you need to be really clear that you can only operate with one bubble, or maybe 2, but not 3. And you're going to have to make that decision and be really clear with that. And it's not good enough to go, we've got a huge sports hall, we can spread people out. If you're going to do that, you're going to need barriers down the middle. You're going to need things that really clearly demark one bubble from another, and they should not mix. Those bubbles should not mix up. One thing that we've also picked up, staff and leaders can move between bubbles. We're very recognising that there are safety concerns. We've got responsibilities towards young people's health and well-being. There may be behavioural issues. There may be special educational needs, disabilities that we need to support with. And it's okay for leaders and workers to move between bubbles, but that should be avoided at all, where possible. Ideally, you're in your bubble with your young people doing your stuff. They come, they go. That's fine. But if it's, I've run a lot of youth centres, and I've seen a lot of things, and if it's all kicking off and you need to step in, then the staff team can work as a group to resolve things and support young people. Now, there are some questions around if someone becomes ill, what should happen? And the message that we're getting from Public Health England is pretty clear, that if a member of a bubble becomes ill, the whole bubble should self-isolate, get tested and call 119, which is the NHS test and trace number. 119 will advise you what you need to do. And if they advise you that the whole group now needs to self-isolate for 14 days, that is what you need to do. And if that means not going into school but being educated at home, that's unfortunately what needs to happen. And we've got to hope that that doesn't happen as much as, but it has happened already a few times. We have had to advise a few organisations where this has happened. I think as testing gets better, more accurate, we might start to see those quarantine times coming down, but it is about supporting those bubbles. If someone comes ill, then you need to contact Test and Trace. And they'll probably be in touch with you anyway because you get a positive test, but follow their instructions is really, really key. So face coverings are clearly a big challenge to the youth sector. Young people don't like them. They don't have to wear them at school, but when they come to youth centres or youth projects, they do. Why is that? Particularly if they're in the same year group and they're all, they're in at school, why do it in a youth setting? And that's going back to the guidance I said at the beginning, where there are different rules for schools and education than there will be for community settings and activities. And we just have to accept that is the case. We've made plenty of representations to see if we can relax some of this, but the reality is, if we want to be operating and doing our thing, we've got to play our game, do our thing, and support young people to do this. So face coverings are required if you're aged 11 or over. They're only required indoors. So if you're outside, I was talking to somebody from Public Health England the other week, and if you're outside, the risk of catching the virus goes down to 1 to 2% compared to indoors, where it's much higher. So do as much activity outside as you can for as long as you can while the weather holds, and you don't need to wear masks. But when we're going indoors, then masks need to be worn. There are some questions around, can face shields, so the perspex shields be worn? They do count as an alternative, but they're just not as effective at protecting people from the virus. So they might be perfectly appropriate for certain young people with special needs or who can't cope with wearing a face covering. And there are exemptions. We shouldn't be penalising individuals who just can't cope with the claustrophobia or whatever it might be. And they can be exempted from it. But on the whole, the vast majority of young people 11 and over should wear a face covering. If they're under 11, don't need to wear a face covering. Should still social distance under 11, ideally, but it gets harder and harder as they get smaller, and the world recognises that. So I wouldn't sweat it too much. But yeah, over 11 and over, face coverings should be worn. Something else I was going to say on face coverings. I might come back to it later on. So I'm going to wrap up and then move on to your questions in a moment. Just to say, if you are doing work out on the streets in detached settings, if you've had to go digital and also engage with young people in parks and other spaces, we publish, working with the Federation of Detached Youth Workers, specific dedicated guidance around youth work and activities that take place outside of youth centres. This is COVID guidance again. It sort of supplements the main guidance that we've got. It's worth having a look at, and really appreciative of our colleagues at the Federation for working with us to support our sector to keep going. We also worked very closely with our colleagues at UK Youth, and we created a new website. Within a week of being told by the government that lockdown was coming, we had this website up and running. And Alex, who's been chatting to you in the chat room, he's built all this, he set this up, he's our superstar, and we're very grateful for his efforts. On here, you will find hundreds of tools and resources, advice, work packs, all sorts of things that you can do with young people. It's an absolute mine of information, so please do go there. Also on this website, you will find on the very front page templates for your risk assessments or your action plans, checklists, all sorts of things to help you become COVID secure and document your COVID secure status. And you do need to do that. You do need a robust paper trail that you've done all the right things and you put things in place. So go to that Youth Work Support website. It's been fantastic to work with UK Youth, great partners, work collaboratively to pull this together. There's also been the Mix and the Federation Detached Youth Work also supported this work as well. But you know, go there, it's a single point of access where you will find information. You might also be interested in some of the wider reports that the NYA has published as part of COVID-19. We've currently published 4, we've got 2 more coming, one on education and one on rural communities. One on employability and one on rural communities. These reports have a deep dive insight, working largely with the children's commissioners, police and crime commissioners, Home Office, government departments, to look into the impact of COVID-19 on many young people. And the very first report, They're Out of Sight, has shown us, working with the data that we can get from various sources, that there are now 3 times the number of young people who need support from the youth sector at the time that we're sort of struggling to do as much as we would normally be doing. So the demand has gone up 3 times. The young people need us more than ever, hence why we wanted to keep the sector going. Hence why yesterday's decision by the government to give us an exemption from the new rules is really critical. I just want to also say, go to the NYA's YouTube channel, whatever they call it. Go to our YouTube station. So on here you will find lots of videos on lots of different topics. There's our guidance video, there are other bits and pieces, there's some deep dives into youth voice, lots of useful information. Subscribe and join that channel and get involved in the information. So that was all I wanted to sort of run through in terms of some of the headlines, and I wanted to use the rest of our time to go through your questions. And so brilliantly in the background, my colleague Alex has been pulling questions together for us so that we can answer them. If you've got questions, you can put them in the chat box. If others have already asked them, we will try and combine them. Please bear with us, we're doing our best, but we just wanted to clarify those key things. So all you need to know is, as of this week, nothing has changed in terms of our guidance. The nation is at amber, face coverings are needed, and we need to be really careful around those bubbles. So question from Tony: if the room we use is classed as COVID secure, does that mean we can run more than 6 people? And yes, because actually, if your room is large enough and it's COVID secure, you can have at least 1 bubble of 15. That has not changed. So you can operate with a bubble of 15 and keep going with what your activities. And if you've got multiple rooms of that scale, you can have more than, and you've got enough staff, you can have more than 1 bubble 15 operating at the same time. They shouldn't come together is the key message. So Dan's also asked, are bubbles of 15 inside still? Yes, so these apply inside and outside. Ideally, when in youth sector activities, you shouldn't have 2 bubbles of 15 mixing outside, because that's still 30. That's not very helpful. And we know that when they're on their way home from school or they're outside the local shops or whatever they're doing, then they might be mixing in greater groups. That's nature. That's young people for you. We have to operate in a professional environment where we're supporting young people and we're running controlled and structured activities. And that is why we're allowed to carry on operating. It's because we put that professional control around what we do. Angela's asked, can the same leaders run 2 meetings, one after the other, or does there need to be a time gap? No. So you could operate, you could operate a cub group and then a scout group immediately after. You need to put enough time in between to thoroughly clean the building all the way through, make sure all the surfaces have been wiped down, and then you could operate. The staff don't need to worry about being in one bubble between, 4 and 5, and then a different bubble between 7 and 8. That's not a problem. Your staff team can work across. Richard asks, what's the advice for youth workers who cross multiple locations? So I have responsibility for 23 church youth groups. I mean, good on you. Now you can move between the different spaces. You should be, again, wearing masks, washing hands, for personal hygiene. The venue should all be cleaned, but yeah, staff can move around if you need to do that, particularly if you're trying to, monitor safety, what have you. We think that would be perfectly acceptable. Ooh. Right, let me find a few more. So there's a question from Fiona again about running a brownie group then a guiding group. I think I've just covered that for you, Fiona. But you can run one then the other, but you need to clean the building. You need to wash your hands. Need to be wearing those masks. The one thing I was going to say on masks, which is the thing I couldn't remember. Should workers and leaders wear masks? Is a question we're asked quite a bit. And the answer from our point of view is you should be leading by example. Volunteers, workers. We should lead young people by example, and therefore, yes, we should wear them. Now, under the law, just as you go into your local Tesco shop, some staff are wearing them and others aren't. Actually, by law, workers, and that would include volunteers, don't have to wear a mask when delivering activities by law. Whereas young people do have to wear them by law, although those exceptions apply if they have medical needs or they can't cope with it. But we think you should lead by example, and that actually workers should be wearing masks, or at least the shields, to provide that sort of role model for young people. Richard's asked, do bubbles of 15 include staff and volunteers? No, they don't. So you've got 15 young people plus your staff. You shouldn't be having, hopefully not having lots and lots of staff, teams of 10 staff to 15 young people. There are some exceptions to that where I would say that's perfectly appropriate, which is where we've seen some special needs projects that have been in touch with us, where actually you need carers, etc. But we would encourage you to be shrinking down the size of those bubbles so that you're not trying to go more than your 15. You'll make those judgments locally. The goal is to minimize the amount of spread of the virus, and so smaller groups is better in those circumstances, but that is fine. Anna's asked, does voluntary faith-based groups fall under the banner of official youth work? In terms of this guidance, yes. So you're not, official youth work is run by degree qualified professionals. In terms of the youth sector as a whole, then our guidance and our organisation supports you as equals. So our work and this guidance does apply to any youth sector type activity. And the difference is, if you're a leisure centre or you're running a leisure group, there'll be a big difference between coming in and doing a spin class compared to operating a youth group, even if you're doing similar type of activities. So Yvonne's asked, given schools are using school buses, mini and coaches with different year groups, can we use coaches if we use social distancing and masks? You can use transport, you can use public transport, but young people should be wearing masks, face coverings whilst in transit. You should be spreading them out around the vehicle ideally, so that they're within that sort of metre gap between them. That gets a bit tricky. Do your best is what we would advise. This is a real world situation. We can't plan for every eventuality, but you can do trips and visits, but we would encourage you to keep that social distancing, face coverings, have that hand sanitizer, be really focused on keeping that nice hygiene level up, and keeping young people socially distanced by at least a metre. Okay, just hang on a minute. So Rose has asked, what constitutes detached youth activity? Can we meet as an organised youth group in outdoor spaces? Absolutely you can. So what we mean by detached youth activity is any youth sector activity that would take place outdoors. So there's a detached youth work, which would be a very specific professional discipline within the youth sector. But actually what we mean by this is, in terms of detached youth activity, is it's detached from your normal venue. You're going out into a park, into a field, into a green space. My old scout hut when I was growing up had a huge field as part of its premises. That would be detached. You're not inside. I mean, that's what we mean. Karen's asked, there are different rules for self-isolation of youth clubs opposed to schools. We ran a session last week, indoor with masks, well done, ventilated, social distancing in place. One person became positive and the whole group had to isolate. Schools are taking a slightly different approach. This is driven by whatever NHS test and trace 119 advise you to do. There will be differences. They may come up with, depend on circumstances, testing levels. There might be slightly differences, but if you follow NHS test and trace guidance, you will be fine. And if that is different to schools, then that is again the difference between that top tier guidance and the youth sector guidance, and we need to follow NHS test and trace advice. So Antonia's asked, what kind of session do we envisage indoors? I've just lost your question. Here we go. Yeah. What kind of session do we envisage indoors if we were not following the other guidance, but but using NYA, then can we do cooking, sports, craft, video games? All of those things, yeah, cooking, craft work, video games, all of those things are fine. There are some things you should be really conscious of. So if they're playing on Xboxes and they're handing controllers around, then they should be cleaned in between being passed on. If we're playing pool, every time someone switches cues, it should be cleaned. So you probably want more than one. And then you've got to be really careful with our regime of making sure we're cleaning surfaces and we're being very careful. If we're playing football, make sure that we're just kicking it, not headering it, not handling it as much as possible. We're keeping it clean. We've got to be quite ruthless about this. We've got to be quite rigorous in our approach to making sure this stuff is safe. Phil's asked, I have a member of staff who runs a young carers support group in school. During these, we do follow the NYA guidance. Do we follow guidance for schools or the youth sector? The difference is if it's operating in school, then there's a difference between school settings and youth sector settings. If it's in school, you can follow the school's rules. If it's in a youth centre or in a, outside of school premises, you should be following our guidance.
Anyway, so I'm just gonna, if you don't mind.
I think we'll just mute whoever's in the background there. Okay, got a few more minutes, so we'll take a few more questions. Susan's asked, can we run informal drop-ins or must there be a structured activity? No, it can be informal, but you've got to put young people into those bubbles of 15 as you go. So if you've got just random turning up, the first 15 go in bubble 1, the next 15 go in bubble 2, they can't switch places, they can't move between themselves. That is really hard with teenagers. I've run youth centres. I can completely appreciate how challenging that can be. So please do your best within that and educate and involve young people. And the one thing I would say to you is actually when you're writing your risk assessments, when we're creating the kind of new rules of how this is all going to work, do that with young people if you can. Share it with them in advance, send them stuff to read or check out, talk it through with them as they come, give them an induction to the new ways of working, consult them on the new rules. If they don't like wearing masks, explain some of the things I've been trying to talk through with you of why there are different levels of protection to try and keep schools going, and that actually there's the law, we've got to follow them. Educate young people and support them to be part of the team, part of your response. Best thing I'd do is get young people to write some of the risk assessments, or give them a blank one and say, right, how would you risk assess this activity? You'll be quite surprised, I suspect, what they come back with. But involve young people all the way through if you can in terms of what we need to be doing. So Tony's asked, can I double check that the NYA guidance information is suitable for groups of younger than children aged 7 to 11 as opposed to teenagers? And absolutely yes. When we wrote our guidance, we worked with our colleagues, say, Scouts and Guides and others who work from age 4, I think, upwards. So we went through the process of making sure that that was all appropriate. So yeah, the hygiene rules, none of that changes. The bubbles don't change. All the guidance is perfectly appropriate for any age range, really. So certainly those younger ages absolutely follow the guidance. The bit that changes with under 11s is they don't have to wear masks or face coverings. And I think we also recognise that social distancing is getting more challenging at those younger ages as well. But you will do your best to try and educate and keep them separated. Paul's asked, do we need to do a waiver form before a young person attends each session? Obviously, we have a consent form, but do we need separate document to ask if they've had symptoms in the last umpteen days, I assume? I think that's down to your local risk assessment. And I would also, as well as encouraging you to engage with young people, nothing wrong with engaging with their parents as well, and chatting to them and understanding what they might be concerned with. And they'll also probably be a bit confused of, well, why has the school got one rule and you've got a slightly different one? And it's worth explaining that to them. We do not require you to get a waiver or a permission form signed. If that's part of your usual activity, you normally get a parent to sign something, or you feel that would give you comfort or confidence. There's nothing wrong with doing that either. It isn't something the guidance requires, but you need to do your own local risk assessment and come up with your own mitigations. And actually, if one of those things was, parents, are you happy for your child to come and have you explain the following things to your child, young person, then that would be perfectly appropriate. So, we don't want to create work for you either. We want to make this as seamless and as easy as possible. We know this guidance generates a lot of work, so we're not trying to add more layers of things for you have to do, But if that works for you, then that's absolutely fine. So Ross has asked, if volunteers of an informal youth club can't ensure a venue is COVID secure, where their venue is a library or rented community space, then the assumption would be that that volunteer youth club could not run as they can't ensure this. And that is correct. Yes, if your venue is not COVID secure, then you shouldn't be operating. You shouldn't be using that space. Find a different space, try and move, or work towards getting that venue COVID secure. So actually, if you rent a village hall, if your team needs to spend some time cleaning it down, wiping surfaces to make it COVID secure, to implement your risk assessment, then that's what you need to do. We have encouraged in our guidance, talk to the owners of venues, explain what you need to be done, and if you need them to arrange cleaning or additional services to make it COVID secure, then have a chat with them. We do recognise that might, take time and need sorting out. But if you can't operate within the guidance, then you shouldn't be opening. And remain in the digital form or do more work outside, but be going indoors only if you are COVID secure. All right, so Simon's asked, how can we encourage local authorities to open our centres? Simon, all local authorities have been sent our guidance. We've sent that to them directly. They are welcome to talk to us. It's a decision locally, the same as your risk assessments you would need to do. I think if you can demonstrate that you are COVID secure, you're meeting the NYA guidance, you are following the rules, and actually, particularly after yesterday's success in terms of keeping services going, and we are on the website, the government website, there is an exemption list, and youth sector activities are on that exemption list. You can show that to them and encourage them. I'm very happy also to write to any local authority that needs encouragement or support from our angle. Neil's asked, are local police aware of this and how will they know we are exempt? I think we've got to give police a bit of slack in the short term. They are going to be adapting to new rules. They will be told, we believe, I'm pretty confident talking to some colleagues that they will be informed of the exemption list. And if you're running and operating a structured youth sector activity and you can show them your risk assessment, you can show them that you're running that activity, you should be absolutely fine. But again, point them towards the government document on the Government Gov website or our guidance that shows you're allowed to be opening and operating, and you shouldn't have any difficulties there. We will, if necessary, we work very closely with the chiefs of police, and I'm very happy to send further notifications through to them to advise them that whilst others may be in groups of 6, the youth sector will be in bubbles of 15. Okay, last couple of questions then. So Paul's asked, what do we do if the youth do not follow social distancing even after repeated attempts? For me, this comes down to your behaviour management and your risk assessment. And actually, if your young people can't abide by your risk assessment, which has to include keeping people a metre plus apart, then unfortunately, I think your options are quite limited and disappointing, in that you may need to temporarily withdraw services whilst they're educated or you do other things. I would go through the process. I would try and get those young people to engage in the risk assessments to understand what they need to do. But if you can't operate safely, then our guidance requires you not to operate. And that's what you need to be explaining to young people. So Terry's asked, some of our young people I support come with personal assistants to support them, which is fantastic. Should that PA be included in the bubble number, or can they be counted as staff? They're there as a support worker. We would consider them a staff member or a worker or a volunteer, and so they don't need to be counted in the bubble of 15. If you've got lots of young people coming with assistants, then maybe you need to make your overall bubble sizes slightly smaller to accommodate. You haven't got a huge group, but no, actually, if you've got a personal assistant coming to support a young person, then they are there as a worker to support them. Okay, and then finally, Santiago, what is a COVID secure venue? Is it about size or just cleaning? And the answer is it's got to be a bit of both. So it's got to be large enough to accommodate your bubbles, or your bubble of 15. And I ran a youth project out of a community room at the back of a fire station, and you couldn't get more than 7 or 8 people in it. It was great for very small group work, but you couldn't have run a youth club or what have you. So actually, if your venue isn't large enough to have a bubble of 15 moving around, and not being on top of each other, and that sort of meter gap well then we need to be careful about how, then that isn't a COVID secure venue. Other than that, if your venue is large enough and there is the right cleaning, social distancing, we've got the right measures in place around masks or face coverings, hygiene and hand washing, etc., then that's when you hit the point of being COVID secure and you're up and running. So one person's asked, can we run a tuck shop? Tricky, because cafes can open, but then their staff will have gone through a good number of hours of COVID secure training, which we will not necessarily be able to put through. I've yet to get a proper answer around the use of cafes or tuck shops. The challenge with tuck shops, if it's penny sweets, you've got lots of hands going in tubs and handing them over, which is a nightmare for spreading the virus, particularly as you then pick the sweets up and eat it. So actually, in that sense, that shouldn't be happening. But pre-packaged food, things that might be washed down, you might better use a wipe to wipe the outside of a Mars bar or something, that might be okay, but we would probably encourage you to have more healthy options and maybe not to run tuck shops at this point in time, just while we get a bit more familiar with how to do that. So Hannah's asked to clarify, if we would take a group on a trip to an activity that is usually used for social activities like bowling, as long as we have a risk assessment, we can take bubbles of 15. And yeah, that's correct. You can go on your trip with your bubbles of 15 if you've done the risk assessments and you can keep that group socially distanced. If you're going somewhere like bowling, I would contact the venue, because actually the venue may be following the rule of 6. And you might need to then break your group up when you arrive into 3 groups so that you're not over 6. Because the guidance that we've got, the exemptions that we've got, are not for when you're out and about in the community. They are for when you're in your main premises or your venues doing your activity. If you're taking them to a different venue, you will have to comply with that venue's requirements. So get in touch with them in advance and have a chat with them. So someone's pointing out that there's a difference between the face covering guidance in our document and that of Department for Education's out of school settings guidance. And that is because the out of school settings guidance is set by the Department for Education. And that guidance is designed for home tutors, Sunday schools, and it's more educational environments and less the sort of social activities that we may do. So there are some subtle differences, but you need to be following the guidance that's in the NYA, in our documentation. So I'm going to draw us to a close. We've got a minute left. I'd like to thank everybody for your time and for coming. The best way to keep up to speed with what's going on is to follow our social media channels. You can go onto our website as well and join the NYA network. So if you go to our front page of our website, in the top right corner, it says register, fill in your details, and you'll get our newsletter. We don't spam you. It's free to join, but it means you'll get immediate information. So yesterday at 7:30, the government published the list. 3 minutes later, in your inbox would have been the email from us saying, yes, this is, we can carry on operating. So sign up to the network, follow us on social media, and good luck. And thank you for what you're doing for young people. It's an amazing sector. It's a privilege for us to support you. I hope our guidance is useful, and have a great day. Thank you very much.